Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for week number 1 of the LCK Spring Split. It's my overview and analysis video of week number 1, and I'm so excited to finally get back into some LCK coverage on this channel. We haven't seen this region since First Stand, and obviously at First Stand, they ended up absolutely dominating Hanwha Life as the representative from the LCK in home territory in Korea. Absolutely decimated the entire tournament, looked by far like the best team in the world, and I'm really excited to see if that ends up lasting. I said in my primer video, which by the way, if you haven't seen, you can go ahead and check that out up in the iCard. I said in my primer video that I think the 4 best teams in the LCK are probably the 4 best teams in the world right now. Like the top 4 teams in the LCK just kind of feel like they're on a different level. We will see if they live up to that expectation. We've got some really great matchups here in week number 1, so I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from this week? What did you expect from these games? Did they live up to your expectations, or were you surprised? Always interested to hear your thoughts and feedback down below. But without further ado, let's get right into the action. If you are new here, what we are going to do in today's video is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow, as well as a dud of the week, of course, as we always do here. I will be updating my personal power rankings as well from number 1 to number 10, kind of, tracking where I think these teams are moving throughout the rest of this split. But again, small sample size to start off here. This is kind of the typical regular season format for the LCK. 2 series per day, 5 days a week, 10 series in total. Each team plays twice. This is the regular format that we've all gotten used to in the LCK. So everybody with a balanced amount of games will definitely have a good sample size, but not a gigantic one. So, a lot to talk about, but still a lot to learn. So the only way to kick it off is by kicking it off in style. The first series that we got to kick off the LCK Spring Split is a rematch of the Winter Split Finals, a rematch of last summer's finals, and likely the 2 best teams in the LCK and maybe in the world right now, Hanwha Life Esports and Gen.G taking on each other. And Gen.G is going to surprise a lot of people by picking up the 2-0 win. Not just a 2-0 win, by the way, a dominant 2-0 win. They were not even close in this series, quite frankly. They decimated both of these games. Both of them were basically over by the 15-minute mark, and then a lot of the crazy plays ended up happening in favor of Gen.G. Honestly, just huge ups to this team. I maybe underestimated them going into the split. The way I did my primer video and the way I talked about my tiers is that right now HLE was kind of alone at the top of the rankings, not because I think they were by far the best team, but rather because I think there were more question marks about the other 3, top 4 teams than there were about HLE. They're really the only team that I think was consistent across the board, especially as time went on. But Gen.G, if they can kick it into gear, absolutely can be the number 1 team in the world. We've seen what this team can do for quite a while, and they definitely picked up the pace here. For Hanwha Life on the other side, not really the return to the LCK that you were looking for after winning the, summer split and then winning the winter split and then going and winning your first international tournament in First Stand. You come back and you get absolutely decimated by Gen.G. It's really not ideal here, but obviously it's one series. You don't want to freak out too much. This is within the realm of possibility for these players. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series, pretty obviously to me, is going to go to Chovy. I say pretty obviously, but it's not like the rest of this team was bad in any stretch. It's not like Chovy 1v9'd or anything like that, but he certainly tried to 1v9 regardless of the fact that the rest of his team was already super fed, because oh my god, that Azir was insane. Shout out to the guy who I guess doesn't watch the videos anymore, but the guy in the comments section that used to, complain about me praising Chovy and calling him Choky every single week. I don't really know what else you want to see from this guy. He is just the best player in the world when he's on. There is nobody who does what he is able to do when he is playing his best League of Legends, and that was no more clear than when not only he mega gapped Zeka in lane in terms of how Game 2 went on the Azir, but also just completely destroyed every single team fight, made Viper's life a living hell on the Ashe in that second game with those Shuriman shuffles. It was absolutely gorgeous. Chovy is the best player in the world, again, until proven otherwise. I really don't think there has been anything to show that he's not the best player in the world still, and so, player of the series is more than deserved, and he is still going to be a major favorite to win MVP and to lead Gen.G to another championship. Definitely something you got to keep on your radar. But Canyon was also phenomenal, specifically in game number 1. Not that he was bad at all in game number 2 on the Xin Zhao. He did a great job of controlling tempo in the early game, but the Vi was unreal, actually unstoppable for a majority of this, game number 1. There was no answer. Peanut ended up getting, the ultra good jungle pick right now in Neferi on the other side of this matchup that's been decimating the LPL, and it's been really successful basically everywhere that it's been played played in the NACL, even over in North America. Canyon did not care. He was going to generate a ton of resources early on the Vi, and this is like prime Canyon. This was a jungle Canyon type of performance, so jungle mid looking pretty good. Ruler and Duro weren't, you know, holding the team back by any stretch of the imagination. They were phenomenal, definitely better than their counterparts on the other side. Ruler's scoreline is insane, even if a lot of that was set up by Canyon and Chovy. Keen was definitely the better of these two top laners. I talked about how Keen really needed to get back into form after what I considered to be a pretty down winter split. All things considered, he played well in the semifinals, but outside of that, we didn't really see a good version of him at any point in winter. He decimated the top lane matchup here, and it was really impressive. Duro, again, looked very comfortable, and it feels like he's been getting better and better every single game. There's no reason to believe Gen.G can't be the best team in the world, and this was another example of just why you might want to put some money into that basket right now, because this organization just always finds a way to peak in the exact right times. And then for HLE on the other side, obviously it's a very disappointing result. You probably hope to put up at least a little bit of a fight. Game number 1 was an absolute slaughter. Like, Peanut was off the 8-ball the entire game. Canyon was running everything in the jungle, and he just never was able to get going on the Neferi. It's not entirely surprising. Again, I'm not saying that Peanut is a bad carry player, because I just don't think that that's true. I think he is a good carry player, but I think when he loses early on carries, sometimes it can be a bit of a problem, and that's what we saw here. That's like the only flaw in Peanut's game, but when it's exposed quite a lot. He was definitely better on the Skarner in game number 2, but he still was out-jungled by Canyon on the Xin Zhao. It's not like he won game number 2 or was in a better spot, you know, all things considered. He wasn't actually doing all that well there, but he's not dead of the series. I very much considered it between 3 people, Zeus, Zeka, and Viper. I think all 3 of them could theoretically get dead of the series here. I'm giving it to Zeus on the top side because he made some very questionable decisions. I had some guy, once again, shout out to the commenters. I usually don't bring them up this much, but I had somebody go through a lot of my old primer videos from the beginning of the year, the off-season grades videos, and kind of critique where I put a lot of players in multiple regions, and one of those was Zeus being as an A-. People were really critical of that, even at the time, and people are still critical of that because of how he played over the course of winter. This is the series that shows why Zeus is an A- and not an A or an A+. Like, you can't have series like this and be an A or an A+ player. Like, you just can't, right? If you're going to play like this against good teams in an important series, that's not an A or an A+ player, even if your best games are A+ or A level, because Zeus's best games are by far the best games of any top laner in the world. I don't even think it's really all that close in terms of what his best offering looks like. He's just inconsistent. He's never going to have an entire split where he's just good. It's not really how he operates as a player, and this is another good example where he just got mega outplayed across 2 games by Keem. I definitely considered Zeka for this, if only because Chovy was so much better on the other side. Zeka was a horrible laner in this series. I don't even really know what happened. He's usually not this bad, even against Chovy, who kind of does have his number in the regular season. I don't really know. Zeka just didn't have a very good day. Viper getting absolutely destroyed by Chovy's Azir in the back half of game number 2 made me consider him as well. His positioning was way too aggressive, and he got taken advantage of in multiple points, but at the end of the day, Hanwha Life lost across the board. You can point to everybody on this team not being good enough in this series, and you would be right, and it's the opposite for Gen.G. Everybody did their part, specifically the jungle mid duo, who I thought was tremendously good for Gen.G, and once again, I know I've repeated it a couple of times, but if they're going to play like this is best team in the world caliber stuff, and that's what you wanted to see out of the gate from Gen.G. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, and we go from a top tier clash to a pseudo bottom tier clash between DRX and the DN Freecs. The DRX is going to pick up the 2-0 win, and this is how things were going in the winter split for them, where they were able to, in my opinion, outperform kind of the lack of consistent talent on this team, but the core talent on this team is really good. When you talk about the best players on DRX, they are really solid, and unfortunately for DNF, on the other side of this matchup, boy, are they just like so much less than the sum of their parts. They are not playing up to their own standards right now. There are multiple mistakes being made very regularly by this team, and even though I think they have more talent, in my opinion, than a team like DRX does on paper, they're just not able to execute it nearly as well because their synergy is horrible, and we'll talk about that as we get to DNF. Basically no difference between what they were in winter and what they were in this series, and that concerns me, but for DRX on the other side, this was a very, very good series, and I think there is a lot of good to take away from this, most notably Rich in the top lane, who's going to get player of the series. This is a guy who's kind of just been there for a very long time. When he was in the LCK, he was on a very good Nongshim team that almost made Worlds, that probably should have made Worlds back in like 2021 with Peanut, with Dektum, with Kalin, you know, a lot of these players, you know, Gory, that would go on to do a lot of really good things outside of that system. Rich was the one player that felt like he was kind of bringing that team down. Certainly wasn't nearly as good as the other players on the team at the time. He goes over to the LPL, there's some good and there's some bad. He goes over to North America, there's mostly good good, but there's also a little bit of bad. He got worse as he played more there. He comes back here to the LCK, and what is he in winter? Exactly what he's been the entirety of the time, which is a bad laner, a good team fighter. And while that was still kind of the case here in game number 2 in particular for DRX, that team fighting success is really valuable when you're going up against a player and a team that's not very good at capitalizing on your mistakes in the early game. And if you're going to be able to get any sort of lead on the top side, that's ginormous. Rich absolutely outplayed Dudu throughout this entire series, and that's why he's getting player of the series. Not only because he was, really great in team fights, and he was gliding in terms of how he was fighting a lot of those fights in game number 2. The Embesso looks so clean for him. It feels like a champion that just does everything that he wants to do in a lot of those fights, but he was also winning in lane, which is something that if it happens for Rich, he's just going to be able to dominate games because he is very one-dimensional. If you give him like a free win in the part of the game that he's not good at, he is going to be able to get to that part of the game that he is really good at. So really good to see from Rich. Again, it's more going to be up to whether or not he can keep this up in series where he's not basically given a free advantage in lane. We'll have to see when it comes to that, but at least for now, this was a really solid showing. Teddy was exceptionally good in this series. I don't think it was like, unbelievable mechanics, but he was in the right place at the right time all the time. And Berserker, to his credit, was trying to keep up with Teddy, but Teddy did a great job at being that secondary carry. And this is what I always talk about with Teddy. I know people think I hate this guy as a player, and I definitely am lower on him than a lot of the community is. I always have been, but this is like the perfect role for Teddy. You need one of UCal or Rich to be really solid on a game-to-game basis. You can typically rely on that being UCal, but if Rich is going to take over like this, it can be him as well, so Teddy can step in and be that secondary option, that secondary carry for the team, playing weak side early and then being very useful in the mid and late game, because that's where he is very valuable as a player, and that's exactly what he did here. It was really, really good to see Teddy kind of in his natural habitat of not needing to be the guy that wins you games, because he's just not very good at that. And so, I think this is a good situation and a good role for him. It's going to be up to Rich and UCal to be able to keep that pressure up, but if that's going to be the case, I think Teddy is in a good spot. Ondel also played totally fine in this series, definitely outplayed Life, but followed around Teddy for the most part and did his job, which is all you really need him to do. UCal's incredibly good, especially in lane. I know the scoreline doesn't look good as some of his teammates, but he still was very influential and very useful in this series. And Sponge, his good games have looked so much better than they did last year. I think overall, it's just a good look for DRX, especially being able to play through Rich on the top side. That opens up an entirely new dynamic that I do think is important for this team to have. One of the reasons I criticized DRX and said they could be worse than number 7, even though I put them at number 7 in my power rankings, is because you just don't know what you're going to get out of this team on a game-to-game basis, right? Like Rich, Sponge, Ondel, they're very flippy players, and as much as I like the top tier talent, I think they're very shallow in terms of consistency. If that starts happening, if Rich and Sponge are solid enough LCK players that you can play through them with a ton of resources, all of a sudden the entire outlook on DRX changes and they start looking like a top 6, top 5 team, somewhere in that, range, and that's really good. But this is DNF, so we don't want to take it too far, because DNF has just been atrocious. There's no takeaway for DNF that's even remotely positive. Berserker's good, and he was good in winter, and quite frankly, Berserker in Life as a 2v2 lane is really good for DNF. They play really well early on in games. The problem for Life is he has no synergy with Pioshik, and quite frankly, he doesn't have synergy with anybody other than Berserker on this team, and so when you get past that 10, 11 minute mark and he's moving around the map and trying to create chaos, it gets worse for him, and things start to go a little bit south, and that's exactly what we saw here. Bulldog is arguably the worst mid laner in the entire region. Him and Vikla are kind of fighting it out for that right now. Pioshik is completely off his game. It feels like he doesn't even want to try on this team. I don't even know if he's talking, because he's constantly disconnected from the rest of his team in terms of gameplay. He's not even trying to make combo plays with anybody on the map. It feels like he's trying to actually play a solo game, a single player game. I don't even know how to explain it, and I feel really bad, but Dudu's gonna get done of the series because he was awful here on the top side. He got gapped by Rich, which is just horrible. That is unacceptable for him, and I think the reason I'm so frustrated and upset is because I worry that we spent the best years of Dudu's career using him in a really bad team, or on multiple really bad teams, quite frankly. The Hanwha Life experience, and then transitioning that into the Freecs last year and the year before that, where he was playing really well, he was winning a lot 1v1. It feels like that's not the version of Dudu that we have left. It feels like he's used up all of his good years in the LCK, and unfortunately those years were on teams that just were never going to find success. He finally gets some talent around him, even if that talent hasn't been particularly consistent recently, and everything just falls apart for him. So it's really not ideal. He was really bad on the top side, but Bulldog and Pioshik are unplayable. Arguably the worst jungle mid in the entire region, other than Raptor and Vikla. I mean, maybe even including Raptor and Vikla. That's how bad Pioshik and Bulldog have been. Berserker's a good player, and him and Life have chemistry, but there's just not enough here for this team to be relevant. They're bottom 2 until proven otherwise. And then for DRX on the other side, it's a nice win, but it's DNF at the end of the day. Beating them is cool. You got to beat other teams that are, more relevant, we'll just say, in terms of the standings. This is basically what they were doing in the winter split, and even then it felt like they were a little bit overhyped in terms of their actual production. But that being said, if Sponge and Rich, like I said, are going to be positives, going to be good for this team, that does open up a new can of worms for them, and I think that's where they can continue to grow. Then moving on now to day number 2, and a very interesting series to kick off day 2. It was NS RedForce taking on OK BRION, and NS is going to pick up the 2-0 win. We've got quite a few 2-0 wins to start off the split here. Not a lot of back and forth action, if you will, but NS definitely the better of these two teams in this series, and that's not really surprising to anybody. It's hard to get a real read on Bro because this isn't their full 5-man lineup, or at least I don't expect this will be their full 5-man lineup. As you guys know, if you watch the primer, Hambach is out. He's back down to the Challengers League because he was probably the worst player in the LCK in the winter split. The dude was basically unplayable at every single level. He was good in team fights when he was playing from neutral, but he was the worst early game player of any position player in the entirety of the LCK, and so they wanted to go a different direction. Elim looked like he was brought in to be that jungler, but right at the end of the offseason, they ended up signing Krako. I'm not sure Krako was here in time. That's what I would assume is the reason why Elim is actually starting here. As far as I'm aware, Krako will be their starting jungler, but Elim is in for now, and he was fine in this series. We'll talk about him. I do think that he let a lot of things through that maybe shouldn't have been necessarily allowed because he's not a great jungler, but NS was the better team, in most other ways as well. It wasn't just jungle. That was a gigantic diff in favor of NS. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Gideon, the former Bro jungler himself, coming back and beating his former team. Going into Nefiri in game number 2. Again, Nefiri not exactly having the same kind of success in the LCK as it has had elsewhere in the world so far. That's kind of been pretty traditional for the LCK. A lot of these more aggressive, very popular picks that are coming up in other regions typically don't do as well. Nocturne was always that champion for a long time in the LCK, where it was doing great in the LPL, doing great in the LEC and the LCS, and it was just not doing well in the LCK. It feels like that's just how things go around here in terms of jungle assassins. But speaking of Nocturne, Gideon looked really good on it in game number 2. He's been tremendously good throughout this year, genuinely an upper half jungler in the LCK, which is really hard to do, mind you. The top 4 junglers are all very elite, but Gideon has very clearly, in my opinion, been top 5. He's been better than players like Cuz, who have been really good at this level for quite a long time. There are a very established jungler, Pioshik, that, there are very established junglers, I'll just say, that Gideon has been clearly better than in 2025. Hopefully he's going to be able to keep it up because, honestly, the trajectory has been pretty stable and pretty steady. Getting here isn't all that of a surprise for people who have been following Gideon. He's been really good in the limited opportunities he's been given in the past, but it wasn't just him. Everybody else on the team continues to look good. Kingan's been awesome this year. I feel like almost underratedly very good in the top lane for NS. He's done so much work for them at being able to dominate 1v1s. We've talked about it quite a bit on this channel, but top lane is a role that's getting a lot more focus with the anti-lane swap mechanics now because it's a lot more noticeable when you win or lose really hard in that laning phase, and Kingan has been excellent in terms of the 1v1 so far. Fisher looked really solid here, even if Closer wasn't bad on the other side. The bot lane for NS was definitely better. Jiwoo had one of his better series, I would say, all year long. I've really not been all that into what Jiwoo has been doing. I feel like he's been way too passive, way too much of a team player, where I think that there are opportunities for him to get more resources than what he's actually going for at the current moment. But Lehens is the main character of the bot lane, and that definitely was still the case with the Elise picking game number 1. But NS is just a really well-balanced team, which is not what we were expecting. We thought this jungle mid was going to be one of the weaker ones in the LCK going into the year. That has not been accurate. And then for Bro on the other side, again, I don't want to judge this team too harshly because they don't have their jungler in. This is their backup jungler, all things considered, but Elim was the one with all the resources in game number 2, so it's difficult to kind of take him out of the equation and just look at everything separately. That being said, top and bot lane both were completely outclassed here. Morgan was not nearly as good as Kingan on the other side. I like Morgan, but Morgan is not better than Kingan. When you're going up against the upper tier top laners, that's where Morgan has always faltered. It's just against the middle and lower tier top laners that he's always looked pretty good, and that he's always clearly been better than. I think that is still the case. And then dud of the series for me is going to go to Hype. This was his worst series, in my opinion. opinion, in the LCK, even going back to winter. I don't think I've watched games where he's played this poorly throughout 2025 so far. And, you know, obviously that KT Challengers team has not been successful at the LCK level. That's the bare minimum that I can say. Hanwha has already been demoted back to the Challengers League. Hype has already been demoted back to the Challengers League. All of the players that ended up getting called up from that team that basically won everything in the Challengers League last year, they've just not been able to make it work so far. And again, it just makes me reiterate that there is no bigger difference between any tier 2 and tier 1 league in any region in the world than there is in Korea. Like, the jump between Challengers League and the LCK is ginormous. Very few players can make that transition effectively, especially in year number 1. So I never really expect all that much out of rookies. Hype definitely was not very good here. He was playing Gray Screen Simulator for a majority of this series. Polu obviously wasn't helping in that regard, but, you know, Closer was fine. Elm, I guess, was generally fine, even if he definitely could have optimized on the Fury game more. I just don't really want to judge or comment on Elm too much since he's not actually the starting jungler here for Bro. He's basically a fill-in, but we really don't know what this team is going to look like when they actually get their roster. Krako should be a pretty notable upgrade in terms of them being able to play through him early game, and so they should have more resources. Theoretically, we'll have to just kind of take a wait-and-see approach. For now, it's not looking good for Bro, and then it is looking good for Nongshim. This team is actually really, really good. It looks like they picked up right where they left off at the end of the winter split, where they made top 4, where they almost took down Gen.G. They should have took down Gen.G in a best of 5. Like, this is still a very good team, and it feels like they still have a lot of the momentum they generated earlier this year. Then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it was a matchup between BNK FearX and Dplus KIA that DK is going to pick up the win in, although this is our first 2-1 series win of the entire week. This is our first 3-game set of the entire split, and somehow, someway, it's between Dplus KIA and BNK FearX, the number 1 and number 10 teams from the regular season last split. Genuinely absurd how BFX won game number 2. Not that I'm saying they didn't deserve it. They played really well in that game. Honestly, Diablo is the real deal right now. It feels like he is absolutely trying his best. Him and Kellen are popping off in terms of how the bot lane 2v2 is going and just their ability to be able to team fight and play super aggressive in the mid game, push tempo, push advantage. They are a very good duo in the bot lane, but the rest of this team is unwinnable. Even when they have so many resources, they just throw it away in the back half of games. Vikla ends up, you know, getting overcome with what I like to call LEC Azir syndrome, losing his mind to the mania, going in to feel like he has to Shreem and shuffle somebody because he has a ton of gold on Azir, and he has to be the main character, and he has to be the playmaker, and he chooses Beryl on the Gragas, who has no ultimate, mind you. He can't affect this team fight in any meaningful way. Beryl has been running it the entirety of this series up until this point. Vikla sacrifices his own life when he has all of the gold, all of the resources. Just look at the draft in game number 3. It's Vi, Ashe, Braum, Cassante with the Azir. Like, you gotta be there for damage. You are the only source of consistent damage in the back half of this game. He AFK kills himself to go and kill the support, and they lose the game on the spot. It's genuinely absurd how this keeps happening. I honestly think that Azir is a good champion for pro play, if only because it punishes the players who are so stupid at using him so hard that it ends up costing them the game. But at the end of the day, DK walks out of this with a series win that they probably didn't really deserve. They didn't look very good in this series. This is not a clean win for DK. Certainly not what we saw in winter in the regular season. I am going to give a player of the series here, even though I didn't feel particularly good about anybody here. It's going to go to Lucid because he definitely was the most consistent player on DK, and when you're considering game 1 on the Ivern as well, I think it's very clear that it's Lucid. He was definitely the most relevant player in this entire series. Lucid has been great all year long. He's been on that great trajectory moving up, kind of what we talked about with Gideon, except Lucid is a better player than Gideon, if that makes sense, where you kind of see this breakout coming, or you could have seen this breakout coming into this year. Wasn't very good in his rookie split in spring of last year. Got much better and actually played really well in summer, and, you know, was good in the playoffs, and then, you know, kind of took that leap at the start of this year, which is really good to see. It feels like that's carried over. Showmaker continues to be really aggressive. I like him a lot more on these assassins and these more macro-oriented carries. Aurora is a perfect fit for him. Things like Ryze were working really well in the winter split. I expect to see more of that, more of Talia, etc. The Corki was a little bit less impressive to me. I just don't think that champion is very good right now. Shiwu also continues to be way better than he should be as a rookie. We just talked about how rookies have a hard time adapting to the LCK, and yet he has been pretty exceptional in his rookie split, one of the better top laners in the league. And then aiming and Beryl. Aiming was fine. Like, aiming did what he was supposed to do. This is a very, you know, typical aiming series where he just kind of sits around and does nothing until the team fight stage, in which he does affect the game quite a bit there, but, you know, he's not the most versatile and well-rounded player in the universe. But done of the series, as you can see, is actually staying on the winning side here. It's gonna go to Beryl, as much as I'd love to give this to Vikla or Clear, you know, because I think both of them definitely deserve it, and we'll talk about that more when we get over to BFX. Like, Beryl was the worst player across all three of these games. He insta-ran it in game number 2 on the Cho'Gath support, you know, Cho'Gath, Senna as whatever bot lane duo they wanted to try, and Ego into BFX. It did not work, and Beryl looked horrendous on it. The Gragas was entirely useless. You could argue he was the least relevant player in that entire game, and you would probably be right. Like, the only thing he was relevant for is somehow he convinced Vikla to die to kill him at the end of the game, and I guess that is kind of a positive, but the reason that was such a bad trade is because Beryl was so useless in that game. He was doing absolutely nothing. Beryl was awful here. He was running it for a majority of this series, and this is what we kind of know Beryl to do at points throughout the year, just not play particularly consistent, and certainly not play good League of Legends all year long. It's just not something he is conditioned to do. There are going to be times where he is just atrocious, and that inconsistency is frustrating, but DK, luckily for them, they were playing the worst team in the entire league, who is basically allergic to winning, and so they end up walking out of this series with a victory. I don't think this would have been the case for the other 8 teams that they could have played in this spot. They lose to basically anybody else, but that's how bad BFX is, at least in my opinion. Now, credit to them, they were good at getting resources in this series. Diablo is awesome. Like, this guy is really fun to watch. I think he's a better version of Paddock, and I know I've been comparing him and Paddock a lot, you know, for those of you who watched Paddock when he was in the LCK or are familiar with him now. The super aggressive, like, brain off, only hands type of AD carry. Like, that is Diablo. He definitely is built in that mold, but I do think he has a better awareness factor to him than Paddock did in terms of when to turn that on. Him and Kellen are great as a duo. Kellen is definitely like directing traffic and kind of aiming the missile, if you want to call that. They've been very good. Like, both of them have been very good mechanically all year long, and they are definitely the strength of this team. And you know what? Vikla got super fed on Azir. Like, he absolutely should have 1v9 to the end of that game in game number 3. It was perfectly set up for him to be relevant throughout the back half. Again, he just killed himself. He, like, actively lost the game individually for his team by making one gigantic error. I can't explain it. It's LEC Azir syndrome. LEC mid laners do this every possible opportunity they have. That's why I call it that, but it's just mind control on this champion to throw away any lead you have because you just can't sit still. You know, this champ's really good at sitting in the back of team fights and putting out a lot of damage, right? Like, people need to remember, you don't have to shuffle on Azir. You can actually just do damage and win the game for your team. It's just absurd, but you guys get it at this point. If you want to give Dead of the Series to Vikla for throwing it away, that's totally fine, but they were only in it because of his gold in the first place. Clear was the other player I really considered for Dead of the Series because, man, that Cassante game was brutal. He's just not a good player anymore. I don't know if it's his mechanics. We've seen a decent mechanical ceiling from him, but he is definitely mentally checked out, as I've said all year. It's not like a lack of effort in this series. It's more so just a lack of, like, understanding of where he needs to be and how to team fight on a lot of these champions. His mental game is very weak, and that's just, it is what it is, right? BFX is a very weak team, and quite frankly, I think almost any other team wins this series other than them, and that's a credit to DK for, I guess, getting lucky enough to have their bad games happen against the worst team in the league, but this was not clean from either team, and I think both are going to be looking to play better later on in the week. Then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the week, and another good matchup between Hanwha Life Esports and KT Rolster this time around, getting them their first series of the split, and HLE is going to get some revenge for earlier on in the week by picking up the 2-1 series win. KT did put up a decent fight here. BDD is a really freaking good player. There's so much to like about how he plays the game, but at the end of the day, HLE is too consistent across the board, and if you wanted a bounce back series from, you know, what we saw from them against Gen.G, I think this was definitely it. Maybe you would have liked a 2-0 just to see them absolutely destroy a team that they're way better than, or that they should be way better than, but at the end of the day, they were definitely better here. It's not like what we just saw with Dplus KIA versus BFX, where it was like, you kind of got lucky to walk out of that with a win. That you didn't feel lucky to walk out of this with the win. You were the better of these two teams. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Zeus on the top side. Gave him Dead of the Series for the first series, Player of the Series for the second one. I mean, the most classic Zeus week you can possibly have in the LCK. Plays 2 unplayably bad games in the first series. Maybe not unplayably bad. That might be a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but still, like, really bad games in the first series, and then completely gaps perfect later on in the week. You just don't really know what you're going to get out of this guy on a game-to-game basis, especially against top-tier talent. Perfect is certainly not top-tier talent in the LCK. I don't think he's bad, though. You know, KT Rolster fans can sometimes be, we'll just say, passionate. I think that's the proper way to put it. I guess generally telecom fans in the LCK LCK can be passionate, if that's the term we want to use, and they can be a little bit expectant of some of their players. I think Perfect is a more than serviceable, very like league average top laner. He's not a superstar. He's not somebody that's going to help push you into the top, 2 or top 3, but you can have Perfect on a top 2 or top 3 team if the rest of the team is really good. He's not going to drag the team down or anything like that. He's perfectly fine as a top laner, pun entirely intended, but Zeus is way better than that, especially when he has a point to prove after kind of getting embarrassed by Keen in that first series. So nice job from Zeus. Obviously, you'd love to see more of this more frequently, but, it's Zeus. You're never going to get a good version of him throughout the entirety of the year. It's just not how things go with him. I also very much considered Viper for player of the series here. He was awesome in this series. His positioning in particular was spectacular in game number 3. I think if Zeus actively just didn't have that final team fight where he couldn't die on the Jax in game number 3, I probably would have given Viper player of the series because he mega gap decked him on the other side of this. Now, that's not necessarily been a huge accomplishment for anybody in the LCK so far in 2025, but we'll get to that more when we get into KT. Viper did look great. Zeka definitely had a nice bounce back. Peanut and Delight were fine here as well. There were some mistakes. I'm not going to pretend like this was some sort of perfect series. Game number 2 was not really all that ideal for HLE and how they played it, and they did rely on just being able to win 5v5s in the back half of these games, giving over things like Nefiri and Misfortune in game number 3 that have been very successful globally, but at the end of the day, they walked out with the win, and they did it because they were able to outperform KT in those aforementioned 5v5s, which is, at the end of the day, the important part. If you're going to pick a win condition, you better execute and perform well on it, and at least they did that. And then for KT on the other side, this is a very predictable team. Quite frankly, at this point, we know exactly who they are. BDD is a monster. He's one of the best players in the LCK, arguably top 5, top 6 player in general in the LCK, which makes him a top 5 mid laner. Absurd how that ends up happening, but, mid lane's just crazy at this level. But BDD is a monster. He's incredibly good. That Tristana game in game 2 was gorgeous and brilliant, and you want him on something that can be super aggressive like that. There are people that are mad at the Orianna pick. I understand it because you just kind of don't want your hyper carry on Orianna. It's just not something that he can dominate the game in the early game on, and you definitely don't really want to be playing around Cuz in terms of the current form he's in, but Cuz was pretty fine. He really was not the problem at all in this series. I'm not blaming Cuz. People are going to blame Perfect as well. He got mega gapped by Zeus in terms of how the laning phase went, but who's surprised by this? Perfect has never played well into Zeus in particular. This has always been a negative matchup for him as a player, and it's what happens, right? Perfect is going to be fine against most other top laners. Zeus just has the mechanical skill advantage, but done of the series very easily to me is going to go to Dectum in the bot lane. I'm a Dectum defender. I have been for a very long time. I think people just kind of misrepresent his career. For the most part, it's not that I think that his individual talent is all that misrepresented, more so that I think his time on specific teams is very misrepresented. I think his time on Nongshim was excellent. He was the team dynamics player that ended up, coming along to that team when they rebranded and, being a part of the roster that almost got to Worlds with Peanut and with Rich and with Gory and, with Kellen that we've always talked about. He goes over to Dplus KIA with his bot lane partner, with Kellen, and he's the scapegoat for basically the entire time there. Him and Kellen, I should say, are the scapegoats because nobody wants to yell at Canyon and nobody wants to yell at Showmaker, even though both of them were bad at times for that team, and Dectum and Kellen were honestly totally fine for that team. Dectum ends up getting kicked off there. He goes to DRX and has major elbow injuries and major problems where he gets put in the Challengers League and he's out for most of the year. Non-performance related issues for Dectum, and when he was playing for that team, even though they were a disaster, he was fine individually for them. He goes over to FPX last year and is a huge reason why that team overperforms and is a huge reason why that team ends up doing a lot better than people are expecting. There's a reason he got another LCK job after last year, because as much as Milky Way was stealing a lot of the attention, if they didn't have Dectum and Life on that team as a bot lane, they were not a top, 7 or 8 team in the LPL. That was only the case and only possible because of Dectum, but for whatever reason, he comes over back to KT, comes over back to the LCK, and we now see the worst version, in my opinion, of Dectum. Everybody has been talking about Dectum as if he's been this for his entire career. I just don't think that that's true. He has never played like this before in his career. He's actively detrimental to the team right now. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to try and defend what we're seeing on tape right now. I just will completely push back on the idea that this has always been there and that this is who Dectum is and KT should have expected this. I think it's a little bit crazy and a little bit revisionist history to make that claim, at least in my opinion. But that being said, Dectum wasn't very good here. I mean, Peter was really good. First of all, congrats to Peter for getting another job in the LCK. Really happy to see him back. But Peter was really good here in the support position. He did a lot of really good engaging and, creation and playmaking for KT. But Dectum is just, his positioning is really bad right now. I don't know if it's mental. I don't know if it's more injuries, because again, this is a guy who has suffered in terms of actual chronic illnesses in the past in terms of his elbow. We'll see. Something's going to come out. Something's going to be the case. But at least for now, they're not going to be a consistent consistent team with Dectum playing like this. So KT going through their own struggles and HLE kind of being able to capitalize on that. It's good for them to get back into the win column, but week number 1 is definitely an interesting week overall for HLE because I think there is still a lot to take away from it. That being said, you know, picking up a win here, just getting back on track, that's all you really need to see. HLE is one of those teams that you expect to step up when it matters the most in the playoffs. As long as they're able to generate enough momentum going into it, I think they're probably going to be fine. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and it's the debut of the most popular team in the LCK. It's DRX taking on T1. I say the most popular team, it's not DRX, it's T1 making their season debut here, their split debut, and they pick up a win, a 2-0 win over DRX in this one. No surprise in terms of the outcome, but still a lot to talk about in terms of storylines. I've been very vocal on both this channel and on my Twitter about how I feel about the T1 situation. I'm going to put a close to it in this video. I'm going to talk about it just a bit more, and I'm not going to bring it up again for the rest of this split because I'm tired of talking about this. I'm tired of the drama. I'm tired that this even exists in the first place, and quite frankly, that's why I've been so frustrated in terms of how I've expressed it in this video. But for DRX, they just were outplayed, outclassed. Like, UCal's real good, and the rest of this team's not so good. This is exactly what you would have expected to happen between these two teams. Quite frankly, there was no surprise in terms of how this series ended up going. Outcome-wise, it's everything you could have possibly anticipated out of these two teams, which is why I feel comfortable at least putting a little bit of a button on the T1 offseason issue, because really at the end of the day, that's the only interesting thing to talk about in terms of how these two games ended up going down. So let's talk about it. Player of the series is going to go to Gumayushi, and quite frankly, I feel like some people love to misinterpret, things that people say on the internet. I think that that's the best way I can possibly put it. You know, I said earlier, and I'm going to stick to the word, there are a lot of passionate fans out there for the LCK, and specifically for T1, and I understand that, talking about T1 specifically as an org comes with like a different sense of responsibility than it does any other team or any other org or any other group of players in the entire world. Like, the things that you say about T1 and their players are going to be scrutinized a bit more just because the fan base is so much more passionate. But there are a lot of times where it feels like, man, the context behind the words that are being said is just completely lost. And, I feel really bad because I know there are a lot of really great T1 fans out there that watch the channel and, comment and say like, hey, I don't know if you were necessarily being fair there. I take that kind of criticism, or I guess constructive criticism, into account, but there's just a lot of criticism coming from T1 fans that I don't think is necessarily valid or kind of misses the point of what I'm trying to say about the issue. So I'll put a button on this. It's not about whether or not Guma or Smash is better for the team right now, because I honestly think you could make the argument that either of them are better for the team right now. Guma is probably a better player. I would have given him a higher grade. He would get an A- for me, whereas Smash would get a B+, but both of them would be incredibly good players at the LCK level, borderline top 3 AD carry. Smash, in my opinion, performed just about as well as any AD carry in the entire league last split. I would argue that at least in the regular season, like going into playoffs, and even at times in the playoffs, not throughout the entire playoffs, because T1 fans love to remind me of this, like throughout most of the regular season, Smash was the best AD carry in the LCK in terms of individual performances. That being said, Guma would have probably done a very similar thing for T1. The problem that I get frustrated with is that we have turned this issue that should be a gigantic positive for T1, the fact that they really have 6 players on their team that could be borderline top 3 or 4 in their role in the LCK at bare minimum. Like, you've turned that storyline into a negative, and really the only conversation that's been had around this organization throughout the entire offseason has been that of negativity and that of like mismanagement and all of this stuff, when this situation really didn't need to exist in the first place. And I think that that really is the frustrating part. Guma deserves to start in the LCK. Smash deserves to start in the LCK. But at the end of the day, T1 has to do what's best for their team. Like, if they don't think Guma gives them the best chance to win Worlds this year, I get why you would start Smash. Now, would I agree with that? Maybe not. Like, I don't know. I don't really think all that differently of this team if they were to start Smash over Gumayushi, but Guma is really good. Like, I'm not surprised to see him show up here and dominate. I was singing his praises all of last year. I just think that this conversation has gotten so far out of control that there's basically nothing left to talk about. Again, if you want my last thoughts on it, it's just, how can you be frustrated to have 2 of the best AD carries in the world on your team? Like, oh, okay, they don't get each individual player is not getting the playing time they deserve. That's how League of Legends goes. That's how esports goes. That's how all professional competition goes. I feel like people kind of lose that. This is not even the first time this has happened on T1 in this organization. In fact, it's not even like the 5th or 6th time this happens. This has happened on this organization. This is like the 8th or the 9th time we've gone through this. It just has been a little bit of time. I don't really see any reason to get all that upset about it, but people have blown this this up. It's been the #1 talking point coming into the LCK split. So I just wanted to kind of touch upon that because, again, Guma was great here. He looked good on Jin. He looked great on Miss Fortune. Guma's a really good player. Owner was excellent in this series. People rightfully called out I was maybe a little bit too dismissive of how good Owner has been. He's been excellent, and I really do want to shout out that I think he's really currently in the best stretch of his entire career. I think he's been the most consistent he's been since summer of last year, like going into now. That's probably the best stretch I've ever seen him play individually as a player, and he deserved a little bit better for me in the primer. I'm happy to accept that. Doran is awesome. He's been great on the top side. He didn't let Rich win in lane, and all of a sudden things get a lot easier to do, to play into him at the very least as a player. Keria was great. Faker was still really great here on the Sylas in particular in game 2. T1 looked excellent, but it's exactly what you would expect. They're way better than DRX. They're certainly way more versatile than DRX, and they won in the way that you would anticipate. And then for DRX on the other side, they just don't have the firepower to keep up with a team like T1. Yukal is really good, but he is the only player on that team that has the skill to be able to match his counterpart on the other side. People love Teddy, but Teddy is not nearly as good as Gumayushi. Shout out Teddy versus Gumayushi. People, obviously have pushed back on this narrative, but this is exactly, the Smash Gumayushi thing is very similar to the Gumayushi Teddy thing when people were so frustrated that Teddy was getting benched for Guma. I get they didn't win Worlds with Teddy, and it's not the same in terms of the, longevity and the historic, reign that Guma has had on T1 and, whatever, yada yada. But in terms of trying to get the next generation player in before that player's contract runs out so that they can be ready when they are given a full time to start, that's what, Guma was given, and that's why he's been so successful. Teddy has never been as good as Gumayushi, and, it's a wait-and-see approach on how that ends up working out for the other two AD carries on T1, but, it's just a funny little parallel. It's especially funny that they play against each other in the first series of the year. Ondel is not an LCK caliber support for most of the games that he plays. He can be fine in certain situations, but he's certainly not consistent. And then, like I said, Rich, when he's not given a free pass on the top side, is not good. But Sponge is going to get dead of the series. The dude was Vi-ulting a Rakan at the end of game #2. Like, I don't know if it's just mental diff or if he misclicked or what's going on, but like, it's just one of those things where, yeah, you're already losing, but you gotta at least try. Like, you gotta at least do something here, and Sponge was not particularly productive in terms of the late game team fights. DRX was not on the same level of T1, and that was to be expected, but T1 is still a good team, whether they start Guma or whether they start Smash. Both of them are very good. T1 has proven that they are a top 2, top 3, maybe even top 1 team in the LCK with both of their AD carries in, and that's what makes them so dangerous, is that there's really no combination of players that I think makes them weak. This is a team that I think will overperform what a lot of the expectations were, especially coming out of the winter split, which is why I had them top 3 in my power rankings. To me, right now, that's kind of the floor for them. I think that there is a chance they could be better than that. Then moving on now to day #4, and we go back to the bottom of the table. Done talking about teams that are, going to be competing near the top. It's OK BRION taking on BNK FearX. And BNK FearX picks up their first series win of the entire year. They didn't get a single one of these in the winter split. They ended up being that 10th place team, the first team eliminated in the group stage, and Bro unfortunately falls victim to them as their first official win of the entire split, the entire year. So congratulations to BFX. They looked really, really good in this series, especially in game #3 that they honestly just kind of dominated. It wasn't particularly close. There's a lot of players you can look at in a really positive light, but for Bro on the other side, like, it's just hard to get an idea of where this team lands because the one player that really let them down and really didn't play particularly well, I don't think is playing in week #2. And so it's difficult to be like, oh, this team is obviously really bad, because if Kraka was in here for this team, do they lose this series? I don't know. They already won game #1. They looked pretty good in game #1. Hype and Closer, I think, played really well. There are takeaways from here that I think are positive for Bro, but at the end of the day, Elam was the worst player on the Rift, and that's why they ended up losing. So, I'll kind of take a wait-and-see approach, but BFX picks up a win. Congratulations to them. It is against a backup jungler that they did take advantage of, but a win is a win nonetheless. Player of the series for me is going to go to Raptor in the jungle, although if you wanted to give this to Diablo in the bot lane, I think that that's totally fair. Not because I think Diablo was the best player in this series, because I honestly don't think Diablo was the best player in this series. I think Raptor was more important, and I think he was more consistent towards BFX's success than Diablo was, but at that same time, how do you have this conversation about BFX without talking about Diablo first? This team has not been able to win at all, and he's been the one player that's been really consistently good throughout the entirety of the year. Him and Kellen, again, I don't want to take anything away from Kellen, who has also been very good so far in 2025, but Raptor was the best player on the Rift, so I guess I'll give him player of the series, begrudgingly. Jokes aside, Raptor was really solid here, and he has been a solid player at this level before. He's been a Feast or Famine player. Last year, he won a lot of games for for FearX. Like, he was in a position where he was like the 6th or the 7th best jungler in the league. He got this team to playoffs in the summer split, being the primary option for the team. We know he can be successful at this level if given the right opportunity, but that opportunity has not arisen so far in 2025. He's definitely played the worst league of his entire career so far, but again, a former bro jungler that kind of gets some revenge against his former team by picking up yet another victory. Specifically, the Skarner game in Game 3 is, I think, where a lot of people are going to put a lot of their attention, but he was really great on the Wukong in Game 2 as well. Again, if you wanted to give this to Diablo because he is kind of the main character of BFX, I think that that's entirely fair. In that same vein, the Xayah, the Kai'Sa, both of them looked very good. Kellen continues to be a great setup man for Diablo, especially in the 2v2 early on in games. There's a reason Diablo has great laning stats, and it's not just because Diablo's a good laner. Diablo is a good laner, and I want to point that out, but Kellen has been great in the 2v2 so far this year. Hopefully that's going to be able to keep up. Vikla and Clear end up getting wins on champions that they have been entirely unsuccessful on, not only this year, but throughout a lot of their careers. Vikla gets a win on Azir in Game 3, where he's looked horrible on that in recent memory. Clear gets a win on Fiora in Game number 3, another champion he's looked really bad on recently. Like, this was a recipe for disaster for BFX, and they still were able to overcome it and come out on top. You've got to be excited for the team picking up their first win of the year. Obviously, dubious circumstances surrounding their opportunity to be able to pick that up, but at the end of the day, a win is a win, and I'm sure they're going to be excited about that. And then for Bro on the other side, like, dud of the series is going to go to Elim. He was easily the worst player on the Rift in this series. The Ivern in Game 3 was entirely useless, and he did basically nothing in Game 2 on the Xin Zhao, especially because that game ended up going a little bit later in terms of like the team fighting stage, and he needed to be useful there, which he just was never going to be on that champion. But once again, it's hard to get anything too much in terms of a takeaway from that situation because Elim's probably not playing another game for this team moving forward. People are critical of them bringing Elim in the first place, of course, a former T1 jungler, and so he's naturally going to have a little bit more eyes on him and, you know, more opinions, both good and bad, on him because he's been seen by so many more people. And, you know, I think that there is, you know, Elim's fine. Elim's comparable to Hanwha in terms of like current ability. People really don't want to hear that, but that's kind of the truth of the situation. There are worse junglers you could have subbed in here, but I understand wanting to go in a different direction in the jungle from Hanwha, and I think Krako hopefully will be able to stabilize this team because they've just not found any answer in that position so far in 2025. I do want to give this team credit in other areas, though. Like I said, Closer and Hype were pretty good here. Hype was much better than he was in the first series. He still wasn't great in lane, but that wasn't necessarily his job in this series. It was more so there to kind of be a more consistent skirmisher, and he does that at a really high level. People are talking about Hype being somebody that, like, oh, KT should have absolutely kept Hype. I agree. Like, I do think he should have been the starting AD carry for KT. I said that in the offseason, but they went after Pays and missed, and they already let Hype go by the time they needed an AD carry, and so Dectum ended up becoming kind of the last case option, the break in case of the break glass in case of emergency option for KT at AD carry. But that being said, Hype has not been like a super consistent ADC at this level by any stretch, and we've already seen the rest of the KT Challengers team really disappoint at this level. We'll see. Like, Bro looks like a disaster. Hype has not necessarily been super successful. Closer's been the best player on this team, and I don't even think it's been all that close. It's been pretty funny to say that because I'm pretty anti-Closer, all things considered. I've certainly never been that big of a fan of him. In fact, I've pushed back on some of his like hype over the past couple of years, but he's been really good this year. Honestly, more impressive this year than maybe at any point individually in his entire career from me, from a mechanical perspective, maybe other than the small SKT stint that he had at the beginning of his career. He's actually winning in lane now, which he's never done all that consistently, so that's good to see. Morgan's totally fine as a top laner again. He's exactly who you think he would be, but Bro just don't seem to have the firepower to be able to withstand a bad performance from one of their members. That was their problem in the winter split as well when Hanwha was running it. They just don't have the players to be able to step up and overcome, you know, having the worst player on the Rift on your team. And that's a hard thing to do. They need to figure out the jungle position if they're going to be able to move forward. But big win for BFX. Glad they're able to get on the board here in week 1. Hopefully that takes some of the pressure off of them for the rest of the split, but still a lot to work on for them moving forward. Then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's a matchup between the DN Freecs and NS RedForce. That NS is yet again going to pick up yet another 2-0 win, and they start off the year 2-0-4-0, or at least they start off the split 2-0-4-0 in terms of their LCK standings, and it's about as good as you could possibly ask for. It's all 5 players playing really well, and it's the one player that I talked about probably the least in winter stepping up and being really exceptional for them, like we thought he would be at the beginning of the year. We kind of expected expected a lot out of Jiwoo coming into 2025. He didn't necessarily live up to that in Winter. He was much more passive, much more of like a secondary option, you know, kind of a background player for Nongshim, but here he is being the main character of this series and taking over. For DNF on the other side, there's just nothing else left to expect from this roster. We know exactly who they are, and who they are is not very good. Like, they are just not a very good team. They are so much less than the sum of their parts. There are pieces on this team that I think are playing well individually or have good moments every once in a while, but the overall package is just so lackluster that we'll get into it when we get into it. But for Nongshim, player of the series, obviously, is going to go to Jiwoo. You didn't have to think about this. Nobody had to think about this. He was the main character of this series, the protagonist, if you will, and I'm really excited to say that and to see that from Nongshim in the first place, because I was getting a little, I don't want to say concerned, because I wasn't like taken aback like, oh, is Jiwoo not as good as we thought he was, but more so, unfortunately, I think Jiwoo's going to fall into kind of the low resource role on this team, with Lehens being such a primary playmaker for them, moving around the map so much. Jiwoo is probably going to be by himself in lane a lot more than he probably should be with how good he is as a player, but here you go, a main character Jiwoo series, and he does really, really well with it. Two back-to-back hyper carry games here, the Kaisa and the Zeri in games 1 and 2, and he takes over in both, specifically the Zeri in game 2, because this entire draft is built around making sure Zeri is in a good spot. Like, Jiwoo's just a menace when he gets resources. There is a reason this guy was considered one of the up-and-coming great Korean AD carries for a little while. At least, you know, that's what I was calling him on this channel. I was really kind of pushing that he could be moved to a top-tier team, and, you know, a lot of KT fans are like, oh, if only we had Jiwoo. Nongshim's better than KT Rolster. Like, I'm sorry, Jiwoo would be downgrading going from Nongshim to KT at the current moment, even with BDD. Like, that's just how things go. Jiwoo is a reason why this team is good, but they're good without him being a superstar as well, and that's what makes it different. He gets to play with Lehens on this team, who mega support gapped Life on the other side. Maybe he is still a little bit over-eager, but again, as we've said the entire year, KDA is never going to be an accurate way to evaluate what Lehens is doing on this team in particular. It can be, you know, for supports. I'm not trying to say that KDA is a useless stat or anything like that. I do think it's obviously not as prioritized, all right? It shouldn't be as prioritized as other things, but Lehens' KDA is entirely pointless in telling you how well he did. It's all really about how much he can set up for the rest of the team, because he understands that if he's going to be able to set things up for his team, they're going to be able to follow through. That's what he's been the entire split. He was really good at that here. Gideon continues to look really solid, even if he wasn't perfect. Fisher, at times, was okay. At times was a little bit lackluster in terms of his aggressiveness, especially in game 1 on the Azir. I think he played his role better on the Galio in game number 2, and Kingen was probably the weaker of these two top laners, but at the end of the day, they had the best player on the Rift in Jiwoo, and if you're going to be able to elevate the rest of the team like that, and you know that this is probably one of their weaker performances as a unit, as a whole, especially in recent times, that's a really good sign. Nongshim's genuinely a good team. They're the best of the rest. They are the best team outside of the top 4 right now, and I think that that is a really, really big thing to say. And then for DNF on the other side, like, how much more can I say about this team that we haven't already talked about? Berserker is really, really good. This guy is really good at League of Legends, and quite frankly should be on an upper tier team. Now, if you want to sit here as a KT fan and cry about not having Berserker, I think that's entirely fair, but that's also your fault. Like, you had the opportunity to grab him, and you decked him instead. Berserker is a good player. The rest of this team is just not clicking. I think the frustrating part for me is that I have to give Dead of the Series to Life, because he wasn't very good here. Life was good at the beginning of this year, and people are going to forget that because it feels like this team is just on a downward spiral, a downward trajectory, but week 1, week 2 of the winter split, like, Berserker and Life's 2v2 was pretty excellent, and there are still times where it is really good, and I think people tend to be really critical of supports in the LCK just in general. I can name multiple supports that just get thrown under the bus for basically no reason. Life has always been one of those. Obviously, someone like Kellen has always been near the top of that list as somebody who's been scapegoated in a lot of situations. It's just kind of the way things go. Either that or you get loved forever, like, regardless of how you play, like Beryl is. You know, I don't think all of those players are all that different in terms of skill level, but Life is definitely not playing great right now, and I think a lot of that is just him not being connected with Pioshik. And again, I hate to, you know, continue to bring it back to the same thing over and over again, but really, I think that is the main issue for DNF, is there's just no cohesion, no shot calling, no synergy between these players, and Life is now the one who's being taken advantage of in that regard. Bulldog had a couple of good moments, Pioshik had a couple of good moments, but for the most part was still outclassed by Gideon on the other side. Dudu looked good on the top side. This was kind of a traditional Dudu series. Maybe he needs his team to be bad in order for him to be good. That would be deeply disappointing in terms of a result, but at the end of the day, there is talent on DNF. They just don't have enough of it to be able to put their cohesion aside, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much talent mechanically you have on your team. If you can't play as a group, if you can't play as a unit, your team is not going to be successful at the LCK level, and that's the case here. It doesn't matter that Berserker is really good. It doesn't matter that Dudu can pop off on the top side. It doesn't matter that, you know, Life has a really good 2v2 right now. None of that matters because DNF have no cohesion, and they are less than the sum of their parts. And so, you know, it's unfortunate for them, but it is the case. They're a bottom 2 team, maybe even a bottom 1 team, with BFX actually picking up a win here in week number 1, and then with Nongshim on the other side, like, this is a genuinely good team. They're better than KT Rolster, they're better than DRX. Like, this team is just in a great spot right now. It was not a flash in the pan to see what they were able to do in winter. They're actually building something with this roster, and all I'm really hopeful for is that it can continue to grow, because who knows, one small mistake by a team in the top 4, is Nongshim really all that far out from being like a Worlds team in the LCK? It's crazy to say, but, you know, it could actually be a possibility for them. But then moving on to our 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 1, and we had a really important matchup between KT Rolster and Dplus KIA, where DK is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. They are going to be able to get that 2-0 to start their split, and obviously it didn't come in the cleanest of ways at the start of the week, but they got there by the end of it because both of these games were definitely entirely in their favor. So much so that they made a substitution happen on the other side of this matchup mid-series, and quite frankly, I'm going to talk about KT. I think I have some very different opinions from a lot of the rest of the league community when it comes to where KT is sitting right now. Not that I'm entirely against what people are saying, I just think there's too much optimism surrounding this roster and too much optimism surrounding what they could be in the best case scenario with 1 or 2 minor tweaks. I think this team is broken at a fundamental level, and I think it will take a lot to actively fix KT from where they are right now. But again, we'll get into that as we go further along. Let's talk about DK. Player of the series is going to go to Shiwu on the top side. This dude is ridiculous. He's 17 years old, and he's coming to the LCK and immediately slotted into a team that wants to win right now, who was the best team in the regular season in the winter split, and it's been a gigantic positive, an upgrade for them in the top lane. It's really, really insane just how good he has been. We've talked so much already in this video about how hard it is to play in the LCK as a rookie. We see players like Hype really struggling this week, and we see Hambach and Wei having to get benched because they just can't, like, make that transition day number 1. Like, they need more time in order to be able to make that, and those teams want to actually try and win at the current moment. But Shiwu is just built different. This is a 17-year-old kind of built in the mold of Pays, and, you know, obviously they're not the same player. They don't play the same position. They don't have the same, you know, pedigree or anything like that, but, like, a 17-year-old coming into a good team and immediately making an impact, like, that's what Shiwu has been able to do, and I do think he's on the trajectory to be considered one of the best top laners in the world by the end of the year, which is already insane. The fact that he's been able to do this so quickly is absurd. Lucid is a good player for DK, but you have to remember, Lucid was not very good in his first split. He took some time to get used to playing at the LCK level. He really didn't figure it out until spring playoffs and then got good in summer. But, like, Shiwu has made this transition so much quicker than even a player who I'm considering, like, arguably a top 10 player in the world right now in Lucid. That's how impressive it is what Shiwu is doing on the top side. Again, perfect casting. Neither of them are a big competition. We'll just say neither of them should be expected to be dominant at this level. But, you know, Shiwu is not expected to be dominant at this level. It's been really impressive to watch him. I do also want to shout out Aiming, who I think played really well in this series. Dektum actually did put up a really good fight. Easily his best series as a member of KT Rolster. I don't even think that's all that up for debate. The bot lane in general for KT was pretty good here. Arguably the best part of the team, although BDD once again continued to play well, but we'll talk about that again when we get to KT. Aiming just was better. He was more valuable throughout, especially the back half of these games. Again, Aiming's not going to break the mold. He's not going to be a different player than he's ever been at any point in his career, but he is going to do the thing he does really well, and he did that here. Beryl was solid, even if I think that Peter was arguably better on the other side of this. Peter continues to impress me as a player. I've always been on his side. Again, we'll get to it. Lucid looked good. Showmaker looked solid. Like, DK is who we think they are. I'm worried that they're not better than number 4. I'm worried that Winter was a bit of an illusion in terms of how good they actually are. But man, if Shiwu and Lucid can take over as this young, like, topside duo, and if Showmaker can get back to MVP form like he was at in the regular season of Winter, like, Aiming's good. Beryl can be fine. Like, he's going to be fine when it matters the most. He's just going to be consistent in the regular season, like DK can still be an upper tier team. I just think some things need to go right for them in that regard, but I am all out on this KT roster. Honestly, like I just don't agree with Reddit or social media in that, oh, like if you bench Perfect and decked them, then this team gets better and they're, you know, a top 5 team from that point. I don't agree with that. Like I just don't think that that is where this team is at. I think that would be like I don't think that's a proper read of how bad this team actually is from top to bottom right now, because Dectum and Peter were totally fine in this series. Dectum had his problems on Tristana, but he was really good on Jhin in game number 1. Peter was super active as a playmaker throughout this entire series, and BDD still played well, but Cuz has been bad. Perfect has not been good enough. Casting came in as the supposed upgrade in the top lane, and he was worse, or just as bad, arguably, on the top side. Like, this isn't just a team that needs 1 or 2 fixes. There is a fundamental issue with how KT plays out a lot of these games that makes them uncompetitive against actual good teams. And part of that is that they don't really know how to play through anybody that isn't BDD. And part of that is they really don't even know how to play through BDD. First of all, if Cuz is going to be bad, if he's actually going to be a bottom 4 jungler, which he kind of has been over the course of this year, it does not matter who's in the bot lane or in the top lane. This team is not going to have any pressure, and you're not going to be able to compete with the good teams in the LCK. It's just not going to happen. Even a team like Nongshim is going to be able to outpace and outplay you if you don't have any jungle pressure. That is too important on the current map to just give that away. And quite frankly, Cuz has not been good enough. I very much considered him for dead of the series. But like, top lane is what it is. Like, there is no easy upgrade right now in top lane. Perfect is going to get dead of the series because he was really bad in game 1 on the Gwen, and he needed to do better. He got benched for a reason, but Perfect is not the worst top laner in the league. There are worse top laners, and KT still can't win with other pieces, right? Like, Perfect's not supposed to be a main character on this team. You would hope that he's the 5th option on this team. That's not really the case. Dectum, even when he is playing well, doesn't have the support from the rest of the team. They have no idea how to play through bot lane. Peter was good, really good. In fact, I would argue he was the best player on KT in this series, and BDD continues to be a positive, but I think there is a fundamental issue with KT. I think they are broken at a foundational level more than people are giving them credit for, and they need to fix that before they just all of a sudden become good. You don't just need 1 or 2 changes. You need a lot of changes on this team, and whether that's, you know, getting players back into a groove or just getting a different shot calling system in place or replacing those players, I don't know what it is, but something's got to change. KT is just not in a good enough spot to be where the org, I think, expects themselves to be right now, and DK did take advantage of that. Again, not a hard week for DK. They ran into a couple of teams that are kind of in the middle of strife at the current moment in BFX and KT, but at the end of the day, a 2-0 is a 2-0, and with Shiwu playing really well, hopefully this is the sign of things to come. I still have some, you know, reservations, some questions about whether or not they're top 2 or top 3, but they certainly can get there. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in the LCK, and we absolutely saved the best for last. It was the historic matchup in the LCK between T1 and Gen.G, and Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-1 series win, but that sentence alone does absolutely nothing to tell you just how incredible this series was. I mean, this was everything that these two teams needed it to be, and then some. Like, these are arguably the 2 best teams in the world. Again, I think that that's a real conversation to have. I love Hanwha Life Esports. I think they're very good, but like, these 2 teams could peak at any point and immediately be the 2 best teams in the world. That's how good they are. And you find this situation where all 10 of the players on the Rift here are playing their hearts out, are playing at the absolute maximum. And it really just comes down to who has the best player in the world. And unfortunately for T1, Gen.G has the best player in the world. And that really is it for me. I mean, Chovy went bananas in the back half of game number 3. Obviously, the Victor play that everybody's seen on Twitter at this point. Like, you know what it is. If you haven't seen it, go check it out, man. Like, if you type Chovy into the search bar in any social media site right now, it's gonna be the first thing that pops up. His essential, like, 1v4 at the end of the game to win the game for Gen.G. A lot more went into it than that, but Chovy is a monster. He is the best player in the world. Full stop, end of story. No conversation. There's no debate right now in my eyes. He's gonna get player of the series once again here for Gen.G. This dude is playing on every level right now. There's nothing else to criticize. Do you want him to be a little bit safer in game 1 on the Azir? Maybe, but he still was making plays. Like, the Galio was very aggressive, and he did a great job of enabling Canyon on the Nefiri to be a lot more aggressive, and then come on, man, the victor in Game 3. Like, what else do you possibly want to see? We got essentially a standoff between Faker and Chovy at the end of the game, and Chovy won. Like, that's just the way things end up going sometimes. Gen.G is one of the best teams in the world, and it's because they've got the best player in the world in the mid lane. Being able to retain him and have him as their franchise player, it's unbelievably important for them moving forward, and that's the exciting thing for Gen.G. But it wasn't just him. It's not even Ruler, who I want to point out second. Duro went crazy in this series. That Blitzcrank game in game number 3 is super, super under talked about right now. He was probably the best player across that whole game because he did everything in the early game for Gen.G. Every single bit of creation, every opportunity that they had, it was through the Blitzcrank. It was through the hooks that Duro was able to create, burning flash after flash after flash. There were moments where I think nobody on T1 had flash up because Duro was burning it every single second. The amount that he was doing on the map, absolutely unbelievable. And he was really good on the Nautilus in game number 2 as well. I don't want to take that away from him. I don't think people are going to talk about Duro enough when it comes to this series because I think you could make a strong argument that he was player of the series as a whole. And this is a big one for him to step up in. So really awesome for him. Ruler looked great, especially as a late game carry. He was super stable, super safe. I feel very vindicated putting him as my number 180 carry because he continues to look really good. I think people just underestimate how good he was in the playoffs. I think I clearly have a different opinion of what his gameplay looked like in the playoffs than a lot of other people did. I thought this guy was really awesome for Gen.G, especially when it mattered the most in the semifinals and the finals for this team, and he's continued that form here. He's looked great. Canyon looked very good in this series, especially after the Skarner game. You know, Keen had his moments where it was up and down is the way I want to put it. Sorry, I'm so excited that I'm jumbling my words, but both top laners were kind of in the weeds on this one. This really was just one of those series where everything was going back and forth, but Gen.G, they have Chovy, so they're able to come out on top. And then for T1 on the other side, like, it's just unfortunate. I thought they played really well in this series, and this, if anything, doubles down on my take that they're one of the best teams in the world, that they're a top 3 team in the world at the current moment, really without a lot of hesitation, because they did everything they were supposed to do in this series. They just didn't have Chovy, and that really was the difference. And I know it feels like I'm simplifying things a bit too much, but like, quite frankly, like, that's actually just it. I usually don't like doing that, but it's really all it comes down to. Faker was excellent throughout this entire series. He tried to go toe-to-toe with Chovy at the end of the game, who just had too much damage on the Taliyah. He's just never going to be able to survive that. Mistakes coming in from Gumayushi, him walking up on the Caitlyn and dying, like, that's a huge mistake. And obviously, you know, Guma's just generally going to have a bigger microscope than normal because of all the drama surrounding T1 this offseason. That's going to get blown out of proportion, but Guma was really good in this series. I'm not complaining about him. Keria was really good in this series, even if Duro was probably better on the other side of this matchup. Owner had some really good moments, especially on the Xin Zhao in game number 1. Doran's going to get done of the series because, you know, unfortunately, somebody had to play poor in game number 3. Somebody had to have a bad scoreline, but at the end of the day, it's not like Doran was running it or anything. This was just a fantastic series. You can't really point out one player that was awful. I want to prop up these two teams because if there's any takeaway to take away from these two teams and from this series and, you know, from week number 1 from both of them, it's that they are both world class and that this was a matchup of titans. If this is a preview of the spring split finals and the two teams that go to MSI, I'm not going to be surprised by any stretch because they really are that good. But at the end of the day, Chovy reigns supreme. Gen.G picks up another regular season win. Their domestic form is basically unmatched, and we'll see if they can carry that through to being the number 1 team in the LCK again. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK week number 1 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 1 week of action here in the LCK. Again, only 2 best of 3s played by each team, so not a gigantic sample size, but certainly enough to get a better understanding of where a lot of these teams land, which is how I have updated my personal power rankings. You can see that in the column labeled power rank from number 1 to number 10. Change in that next column is going to be how that has changed from last week to this week, from the preseason to now. We can go over the risers and the fallers. First and foremost, the obvious one, Gen.G's going up to number 1. They beat Hanwha Life Esports. They beat T1. As of now, they are the team to beat in the LCK. Again, maybe they don't figure it out in the domestic playoffs, but this is not a team with a bad domestic playoff track record. For now, Gen.G is the team to beat in the LCK despite what happened in the winter split. HLE, though, only dropping to number 2. Obviously, picking up a win in their second series of the week was important, but really, I still have a lot of faith in this team. That being said, T1 is hot on their trail. scale, their one loss being an incredibly competitive series to Gen.G, and T1 was more competitive than HLE was against Gen.G, and I think that that's a good barometer if there are people out there that want T1 at number 2. I think that's the reason that they will point to. For me, now they come in at basically identical grades. I already think that both of these teams are really good. It's really just about who ends up being better on the given day. If you want T1 at 2 and if you want HLE at 3, I think that's fair for me. I'm not willing to make that change as of right now. DK very clearly slots in at number 4, a little bit like a half step below the top 3 right now, but definitely above everybody else, and still maybe a top 4 team in the world. Like, just in all, you know, when you take everything into account, it's kind of crazy how good the LCK is at the top. Number 5, obviously not changing. Nongshim looked excellent this week. No reason to switch that around. KT also sitting at number 6. Didn't really feel the need to change that either, mostly because they played 2 really good teams. They lost to both of them. They looked outclassed in both of those series, but they probably should have lost both of those series. Now, if their problems continue against bad teams and they really start to underperform there, that's when we start to have a concern. But those are the series I expect BDD to be able to overcome just by himself. He really is that good of a player. DRX sits at number 7. They looked good in their win, not so good in their loss against T1, but it's T1. Bro is also going to sit at 8, and people might be surprised by this because they just lost to BFX, the worst team in the entire league, or what most people consider to be the worst team, but we still haven't seen this team with their actual roster. I'm taking a wait-and-see approach. I think Krako will actually improve this team by quite a lot, and I'm expecting that, so that's why they stay at number 8, but BFX is going to jump up to number 9 because DNF is worse at the current moment. They are the worst-case scenario of what that team could possibly turn into, and BFX picked up a win, so they jump up to number 9, but maybe we could see them jump up even further if Bro actually turns out to be bad, even with their new jungler, or if LM is actually just their starter. We'll find out, obviously, going into week number 2, but those are my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comments section below. Always curious to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback. Interested to hear where I'm higher or lower on teams than the general consensus. But let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1. Player of the week, come on, man. No question. It's Chovy. Like, there was nobody else that was even ever going to be in debate for this. Chovy is player of the week. Not only did he decimate HLE, specifically on the Azir in game 2, but even on the Ahri in game number 1, but he took over in that series against T1 in game number 3, basically willing them to a victory at the end of the game. Chovy is the best player in the world until proven otherwise, and that's why he gets player of the week here. My honorable mentions, my runner-ups, if you will. Jiwoo, the AD carry for Nongshim, was excellent throughout all of this week. Nongshim in general was really, really awesome to watch. They didn't have the hardest of schedules, but they did what they were supposed to do, and that's an exciting trade. Jiwoo was kind of the main character of that, and I'm really excited to see if that's more of a running trend moving forward, or if he's going to slot back more into that secondary, tertiary carry that he was in the winter split. And then Shiwoo, the top laner for Dplus KIA. Speaking of somebody who just really impressed individually this week, Shiwoo was dominant in terms of his ability to win in the laning phase and translate that to a successful late game. He has been unbelievable as a 17-year-old on the top side. I hope his growth continues, but those are my honorable mentions, and Chovy is going to be my player of the week. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Life, the support for DNF. There were multiple candidates. I think a lot of people are going to want this to be Dectum, but Dectum wasn't bad enough in their second series for me to consider him for this, at least in my opinion. You know, I just didn't really think about it like that. I think Life was worse, quite frankly, and it's funny, we talk about the former bot lane partners last year on FPX, but Life just feels like he has taken that downward trajectory as his team has gotten worse and worse. It feels like he's not particularly connected. It feels like nobody on that team is particularly connected. Quite frankly, you can give this to anybody on DNF, and they probably deserve it, but that's clearly the worst team in the LCK, and I thought Life was the most noticeable, like, negative standout from the team this week. So Life is going to get my dud of the week, and Chovy is going to get my player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We'll be posting about the rest of the LCK regular season as per usual on this channel, and we cover all 3 of the other major regions as well. So LTA North, LEC, LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week on this channel. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all